My name is Claire, 31 years old, and I'm about to tell you the most satisfying revenge story you've ever heard. Picture this: Thanksgiving dinner, 2024, at my family's mansion in Greenwich, Connecticut. My father Richard had just dropped a bombshell that would change everything, but not in the way he expected. I walked into our family estate that November evening wearing a simple black dress, my heart pounding with anticipation. After 10 years of being dismissed, overlooked, and humiliated by my own family, I was finally ready to reveal the truth that would shock them all. Little did they know, the quiet daughter they had written off as a failure was about to become their boss. Growing up as the middle child in the Sterling family meant living in the shadows of expectations I could never meet. Our sprawling colonial mansion sat on 5 acres of perfectly manicured lawns in one of Connecticut's most exclusive neighborhoods. From the outside, we looked like the American dream personified. My grandfather James had started Sterling Tech Solutions in 1976 with nothing but a used computer and a revolutionary idea for inventory management software. He built it from a garage startup into a regional powerhouse before my father Richard took over in 1998. Dad expanded the company aggressively, growing Sterling Tech from a $15 million family business into a $60 million enterprise with over 200 employees nationwide. Every family gathering became a celebration of his business genius, and he never let anyone forget it, especially his children. There were 3 Sterling kids, and the family dynamics were painfully clear from early on. My older brother Blake, 36, was the golden child despite showing zero aptitude for technology or business. He majored in marketing, partied through college, and still landed a vice president position the day after graduation. Blake spent more time on golf courses than in conference rooms, but somehow Dad remained convinced he was the natural heir to the Sterling throne. Then there was me, Claire, perpetually stuck in the middle at 31. Unlike my siblings, I inherited my grandfather's passion for technology and innovation. I taught myself programming at age 11 and built my first mobile app at 14. I studied computer science and business at MIT, graduated summa cum laude, and had legitimate groundbreaking ideas for modernizing our company's outdated systems. Yet somehow Dad always looked right through me during business discussions, as if I were completely invisible. My younger sister Paige, 28, completed our trio. She had leveraged the Sterling family name to become a lifestyle influencer with hundreds of thousands of followers who adored her perfectly curated glimpses into old money New England living. She had zero interest in software or business operations, but never missed an opportunity to post about being a Sterling Tech heiress while contributing absolutely nothing to the company's actual success. Mom Susan came from old Connecticut money and approached family conflict the way all proper Greenwich wives did, by ignoring it completely and pouring another glass of Chardonnay. She played peacekeeper but ultimately enabled Dad's worst behaviors, especially his systematic dismissal of my business ideas and technical expertise. Richard, maybe you should listen to Claire's proposal, she would occasionally suggest at dinner, only to immediately back down when Dad shot her that withering look that said everything without words. Susan, please. This is actual business. We are discussing, he would reply before turning back to Blake to continue their conversation about yacht clubs or whatever non-business topic they were actually discussing while calling it strategy. Family gatherings always centered around business talk that somehow excluded me entirely. Dad and Blake would dominate conversations with industry jargon and inside jokes while I sat silently, despite understanding the technology and market trends better than either of them combined. If I dared to contribute an idea or insight, Dad would smile condescendingly and say something like, "That's sweet, Claire, but leave the real business discussions to people who understand how the world actually works." The breaking point came when I was 22 years old. Fresh out of MIT with highest honors, I had developed a revolutionary cloud-based integration solution that could have modernized our entire product line years before our competitors entered that market space. I spent months preparing a comprehensive business plan, detailed market analysis, and complete technical specifications. Dad finally agreed to let me present during a board meeting, supposedly as a professional courtesy to his daughter. I still remember walking into that mahogany-paneled boardroom, laptop and presentation materials in hand, heart pounding with a mixture of nervous excitement and desperate hope. The board members, all men in their 50s and 60s who had been Dad's friends and business partners for decades, watched with polite but distant expressions as I connected my laptop to the projector and began what I thought would be my moment of vindication. 10 minutes into my carefully prepared presentation, Dad checked his expensive watch, sighed loudly with theatrical impatience, and raised his hand to stop me mid-sentence. The gesture was so dismissive, so publicly humiliating, that I felt my cheeks burn with embarrassment. "I think we have seen quite enough," he said with that tight smile that never reached his eyes, the same expression he used when rejecting vendor proposals he deemed unworthy. "Claire, sweetheart, this is all very creative and ambitious, but completely impractical for a serious enterprise like ours. Our clients want stability and proven solutions, not experimental technologies from fresh college graduates." He turned to the board members with an apologetic shrug that made my stomach twist with humiliation. My daughter just graduated college and is full of these academic theories. Very impressive in classrooms, but not quite ready for real-world applications. Now, shall we move on to actual business matters that require our immediate attention? The humiliation burned through me like acid as I packed up my materials while they chuckled and moved on as if I had never been in the room. That night, staring at my childhood bedroom ceiling, I made a decision that would change absolutely everything. I would leave Connecticut and the family business behind forever. I would build something of my own, something so successful and impressive that even my father could never dismiss or ignore it again. That was the night Claire Sterling died, and Claire the entrepreneur was born. I moved to San Francisco with $5,000 in savings and nothing else but determination burning in my chest. My parents assumed it was just a phase, a tantrum that would blow over once reality hit. They indulged my decision with patronizing amusement, like watching a child play dress up. "She will be back when she runs out of money," I overheard Dad telling Mom during one of our increasingly rare phone calls. "California will teach her what the real world is actually like." Those early years were absolutely brutal in ways I had never imagined. My tiny studio apartment in a questionable neighborhood cost nearly my entire monthly budget. I survived on instant ramen and black coffee, working 80-hour weeks first at entry-level coding jobs, then as a freelance developer taking any project I could find. Every single dollar I could save went into building my own company, my own future, my own proof. I created Phoenix Enterprises under the pseudonym C. Stone. The C stood for Claire, but nobody in the tech world knew that connection. I wanted my success or failure to be completely disconnected from the Sterling family name and reputation. This had to be mine alone. I started small, developing custom enterprise solutions for startups and reinvesting every profit back into growth. The work was exhausting but exhilarating. For the first time in my life, my ideas were valued, my technical skills were respected, and my gender was irrelevant to my credibility. Silicon Valley had its problems, but merit spoke louder than family connections. By year 3, I had 10 employees and a real office in South of Market. The breakthrough came when I developed a proprietary integration platform that allowed legacy systems to communicate seamlessly with modern cloud services. Ironically, it was almost identical to what I had pitched to my father years earlier, refined and perfected through real-world application. Venture capital firms came calling, but I maintained majority ownership, absolutely determined to control my own destiny. I had learned from watching my father that losing control meant losing everything that mattered over the next 7 years. I strategically acquired smaller tech companies that complemented our services perfectly. Phoenix Enterprises grew to a $180 million valuation with offices in 3 major cities. Throughout this entire journey, I maintained my pseudonym in all business dealings. In the tech world, C. Stone was known as a brilliant, reclusive founder who rarely gave interviews or appeared at industry events. When I absolutely had to make public appearances, I used subtle changes to my appearance and let my chief operating officer do most of the talking. My family remained completely unaware of my success because I kept it that way deliberately. During holiday calls and occasional visits back to Connecticut, I kept conversations vague, describing my work as doing okay or still figuring things out. Dad never pressed for details because he had already written off my career as inconsequential. This suited me perfectly as I built Phoenix into something that would one day shock them all into silence. What they did not know was that for the past 18 months, I had been strategically acquiring shares in companies that were key suppliers and major clients of Sterling Tech Solutions. I studied their quarterly reports religiously, identified their operational weaknesses, and positioned Phoenix as the perfect buyer to take Sterling Tech to the next level through modern integration. 8 months ago, I had my chief financial officer send an anonymous acquisition offer through a third party, which my father predictably rejected without proper consideration. He dismissed it as opportunistic vultures trying to steal a family legacy. Now, 10 years after being humiliated in that boardroom, I was returning home for Thanksgiving with a plan that would change everything forever. Sterling Tech was struggling with outdated technology, losing market share to more agile competitors, and hemorrhaging their best clients to companies like mine. My father did not know it yet, but I was about to become both his worst nightmare and his only salvation. The week before Thanksgiving, I was in my corner office overlooking San Francisco Bay, finalizing the paperwork for what would be the most important deal of my life. My executive assistant knocked and entered with my travel itinerary. Your private jet is confirmed for Tuesday at 11 a.m., she said, placing the folder on my desk with practiced efficiency. Are you absolutely sure you do not want to bring your executive team to Connecticut for the contract signing? I shook my head firmly. This is personal business, Jennifer. I need to handle it completely alone. After she left, my phone rang immediately. It was Rachel, my best friend since those early struggling days when we shared paper-thin walls in adjacent studio apartments, surviving on dreams and determination. Are you really going through with this whole family Thanksgiving charade? She asked without any preamble, her concern evident in her voice. After everything they did to you? After 10 years of barely speaking to them? I sighed deeply, spinning in my leather chair to face the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the bay. I have to be there in person when it happens, Rachel. I need to see his face when he realizes what I have accomplished. I need him to understand exactly who he dismissed. I remember the last Christmas disaster, she said carefully, referring to a particularly painful visit 2 years prior. Your father announced Blake's promotion to executive vice president while you sat there with your unacknowledged Series B funding round that had just closed. You came back to California and did not speak to them for 6 months. The memory still stung like a fresh wound. Dad had raised a champagne toast to the future of Sterling Tech Solutions, while looking directly at my brother, who had been too hungover from the previous night's party to contribute anything meaningful to the morning strategy meeting. This time will be completely different, I promised, feeling the weight of a decade's worth of preparation behind my words. Everything changes this Thanksgiving. Everything. I spent that evening carefully packing, deliberately choosing my wardrobe to make a subtle but unmistakable statement. Gone were the casual clothes my family associated with my struggling artist phase in California. Instead, I packed tailored Armani suits, a sophisticated Chanel dress for Thanksgiving dinner, Louboutin heels, and the quiet signifiers of serious wealth that only truly successful people recognize. A Patek Philippe watch, a Bottega Veneta handbag, understated diamond earrings from Tiffany. None of it ostentatious or flashy, all of it unmistakably expensive to those who knew what to look for. After years of deliberately downplaying my success around my family, I wanted them to catch glimpses of my transformation before the final revelation. The private jet was an indulgence I rarely used, preferring commercial flights despite my wealth. But this trip warranted the exception, the dramatic statement, the undeniable proof of my success. During the 5-hour flight, I reviewed the acquisition contract one final time, ensuring every detail was absolutely perfect. The irony was not lost on me that for years I had flown coach to Connecticut, eating stale airplane peanuts and squeezing into middle seats, while secretly building the empire that now allowed me to arrive in absolute style. As we began our descent into Connecticut, I felt a strange mixture of nostalgia and steely determination hardening within my chest. The girl who had left this place broken and dismissed was coming home as a woman who could buy and sell everything her father had ever built. The game was about to begin, and this time, I held all the cards. The jet landed at a private airfield outside Greenwich, and a black Bentley waited on the tarmac, another unusual indulgence I had arranged specifically for this trip. As we drove through familiar neighborhoods toward home, I felt memories flooding back with unexpected intensity. Every street corner held a piece of my childhood, every landmark a reminder of dreams that had been crushed before they could fully form. The Sterling family estate looked exactly as it always had, imposing colonial architecture, perfectly manicured grounds now dusted with early November snow, and a massive wreath already hanging on the front door in preparation for the holiday season. I instructed the driver to wait, then took a deep breath before walking up the stone steps I had climbed thousands of times before, but never as the person I had become. Mom answered the door herself, bypassing the housekeeper in her eagerness to see me. Her eyes widened slightly as she took in my appearance, the expensive coat, the subtle jewelry, the confident posture that had replaced my childhood uncertainty. "Claire, darling," she said, embracing me with the familiar scent of expensive perfume and the faint note of midday wine already on her breath. "You look so different. So sophisticated. Is that a Patek Philippe?" "Good eye, Mom," I replied, returning her hug while noting how she seemed smaller somehow, more fragile than I remembered. "It is good to see you." She ushered me inside, chattering excitedly about Thanksgiving preparations and Paige's latest Instagram milestone. I nodded politely, setting down my designer luggage in the grand foyer with its sweeping marble staircase and crystal chandelier that had intimidated me as a child but now seemed merely decorative. "Your father is in his study," Mom said, lowering her voice conspiratorially. "He has been very busy with some big business deal. Very secretive, even with me. Won't tell me any details." I smiled, knowing exactly what deal had captured his attention so completely. "I will say hello before I get settled in my room." Dad's study had always been forbidden territory when we were children, a masculine sanctuary of leather furniture, mahogany paneling, and business journals that proclaimed his importance to anyone who entered. I knocked once and entered without waiting for permission, a small act of defiance that felt symbolically important. He looked up from his desk, reading glasses perched on his nose, surprise flickering across his weathered features before settling into his usual expression of mild disinterest mixed with subtle disappointment. "Claire, you made it," he said, standing for a brief, awkward embrace that felt more like a business handshake. "How was the flight from California?" "Very smooth," I replied deliberately, not taking the chair he gestured toward. "I flew private. Saves considerable time when you have important business to handle." A momentary confusion crossed his features as he processed this information. "Private jet travel? That must have been quite expensive for someone in your position." I shrugged casually, as if the cost was insignificant. "Business has been very good lately. Sometimes convenience is worth the investment." Before he could inquire further about my apparent financial improvement, his phone rang with an urgent tone, and he answered it with a perfunctory, "Excuse me, this is extremely important." I used the opportunity to glance at the papers scattered across his mahogany desk. There it was, exactly as I had expected, the Phoenix Enterprises acquisition proposal with my company logo prominently displayed at the top of every page. My heart raced with anticipation, but I maintained perfect composure as he finished his call. "Sorry about that interruption," he said, hastily gathering the papers into a folder and sliding them into his desk drawer. "Very big things happening at the company right now. Complex business matters that you probably would not understand anyway." The familiar dismissal rolled off me like water now, powerless to hurt me after everything I had accomplished. "Of course, Dad. I will let you get back to your important work." I left his study and headed upstairs to my childhood bedroom, which Mom had maintained as a shrine to my teenage years. Academic achievement awards, debate team trophies, and MIT pennants still adorned the walls like dusty testaments to accomplishments that had never impressed the one person whose approval I had desperately sought. After freshening up and changing into more casual clothes, I headed downstairs to find Blake in the living room, already drinking expensive scotch despite it being barely 3 o'clock in the afternoon. He had inherited our father's tall frame and naturally confident posture, but years of privileged indulgence had softened him around the middle and dulled the sharpness in his eyes. "Well, well," he said, raising his crystal tumbler in a mocking toast. "The prodigal daughter returns from her California adventure. Still playing with computers and pretending to be an entrepreneur?" "Something like that," I replied with a tight smile, refusing to let his condescension affect me. "How is your executive vice president role treating you? Making any meaningful contributions to the company's strategic direction?" His laugh was sharp and dismissive. "Same old Claire, always trying to sound smarter than everyone else in the room. How is your little startup doing? Actually making any real money yet, or still living paycheck to paycheck?" Before I could formulate a response that would not reveal too much too soon, Paige burst into the room with her phone held at the perfect angle to capture her dramatic entrance for her Instagram followers. "Claire is finally here, everyone," she announced to her camera with practiced enthusiasm. "Sterling family reunion time. This is going to be such amazing content for you guys." She air-kissed my cheeks while continuing to record, her perfectly applied makeup and professionally styled hair creating the illusion of effortless beauty that her followers adored. "You look expensive, sister," she stage whispered, still recording everything. "Did you finally land yourself a wealthy tech boyfriend in Silicon Valley?" "No boyfriend," I answered honestly, stepping carefully out of her camera frame. "Just working hard and focusing on building something meaningful." "Blake brought his new girlfriend," Paige continued, lowering her voice dramatically for her audience. "Her name is Amber, she is 23, and she teaches yoga professionally. She is absolutely gorgeous and totally sweet." On cue, a willowy blonde woman entered the room wearing designer athleisure that highlighted her perfect figure. Blake immediately pulled her to his side with obvious pride and possessiveness. "Amber, this is my sister Claire," he said with a vague wave that somehow managed to dismiss an entire decade of my professional accomplishments. "She lives in San Francisco and does computer stuff. Nothing too exciting." "Oh my gosh, I absolutely love San Francisco." Amber gushed with genuine enthusiasm. "The shopping is incredible, and the restaurants are amazing. Do you live near Union Square? I went there last year and bought the most beautiful handbag." Our awkward small talk was interrupted by the sound of Dad's raised voice carrying from his study. Though the words were muffled by the heavy wooden doors, his excited tone was unmistakable throughout the house. "Yes, absolutely. Tomorrow afternoon after Thanksgiving dinner. $55 million is our final offer, and Everest Holdings has been very insistent about those exact terms and timing. I excused myself to the kitchen, needing a moment alone to process the confirmation that everything was proceeding exactly according to plan. The household staff had always been kinder to me than my own family members, treating me with genuine warmth rather than conditional approval. Maria, our housekeeper for over 20 years, was preparing vegetables for tomorrow's feast with the methodical precision of someone who had orchestrated countless Sterling family gatherings. Miss Claire, she smiled warmly, her weathered hands never pausing in their work. It is so wonderful to see you again. You look very well. California has been good to you, I think. Thank you, Maria. Do you need any help with the preparations? She shook her head with maternal firmness. Your mother wants everything absolutely perfect for tomorrow. She says it will be a very big day. Your father apparently has important news to share with the family. I nodded knowingly, wondering if the entire household staff knew about the sale before his own children did. So I have heard. Should be quite interesting. The pre-dinner cocktail hour was excruciating in its familiar dysfunction. Mom fluttered about with forced cheerfulness, checking her phone constantly for catering updates. Dad disappeared into his study every few minutes to take urgent business calls. Blake dominated every conversation with stories about his new boat and recent golf achievements, while Amber nodded admiringly at everything he said. Paige documented everything for her social media followers, providing running commentary about family traditions and holiday magic. I sipped my wine slowly, observing the family dynamics with the detached clarity of someone who had finally stepped outside the system that had once defined her entire world. No longer the hurt daughter desperately seeking validation, but a successful businesswoman about to fundamentally change the game. When Mom finally announced that dinner was ready, I took a deep breath and followed them toward the formal dining room where our family had gathered for holiday meals spanning 3 generations. By the time dessert was served tomorrow night, nothing would ever be the same again. The Sterling family Thanksgiving dinner had always been an elaborate production, and this year was no exception. The massive mahogany dining table gleamed under the warm light of the antique crystal chandelier, set with the finest Wedgwood china that only emerged for the most special occasions. Sterling silver candelabras held ivory-tapered candles, casting a golden glow over the autumn centerpiece of pumpkins, gourds, and fall foliage that Mom had undoubtedly commissioned from Greenwich's most expensive florist. I noted with familiar resignation that I had been seated at the far end of the table, as physically distant from Dad at the head as the formal dining room would allow. Some things never changed, no matter how much money you made or how successful you became. Blake sat proudly at Dad's right hand with Amber beside him, basking in the golden child position he had occupied since birth. Paige claimed the spot to Dad's left, her phone discreetly positioned to capture content throughout the meal. Mom took her traditional place at the opposite end, with me beside her, symbolically separated from the inner circle of family business by 12 feet of polished mahogany. Maria and the kitchen staff brought out course after course with practiced efficiency: butternut squash soup garnished with creme fraiche, harvest salad with candied walnuts and dried cranberries, and finally the centerpiece turkey. A 25-pound bird roasted to golden perfection and accompanied by all the traditional sides that defined Sterling family Thanksgiving. Dad carved the turkey with ceremonial precision while Paige filmed every moment for her social media audience, providing running commentary that made me cringe internally. And here is Daddy carving the turkey, just like his father before him, she narrated to her phone camera. Continuing the Sterling family tradition of excellence in absolutely everything we do. This is what generational wealth and success looks like, you guys. I caught Mom wincing slightly at Paige's performance before taking what I counted as her 5th glass of wine since I had arrived that afternoon. Once our plates were filled with the traditional feast, Dad raised his crystal wine glass for what had become known as the Sterling family gratitude ritual. It had once been a meaningful tradition before it devolved into a competitive status report where each family member tried to outdo the others with their accomplishments and blessings. Blake went first, as the eldest son always did, his voice carrying the confidence of someone who had never doubted his place in the family hierarchy. I am thankful for another record-breaking quarter at Sterling Tech Solutions, he began, though I knew from my private research that the company had actually lost significant market share for the 3rd consecutive quarter. And I am grateful for my new 45-foot yacht, the Sterling Legacy, which has been absolutely incredible for client entertainment. He squeezed Amber's perfectly manicured hand and smiled at her adoringly. And most importantly, I am thankful for new beginnings with this amazing woman who has brought so much joy into my life. Amber giggled and kissed his cheek while Paige made exaggerated gagging motions behind her phone when Blake was not looking directly at her. Paige went next, naturally keeping her phone positioned for optimal lighting as she delivered her gratitude speech. I am so incredibly thankful to have reached 1.2 million followers this year, she announced with genuine excitement. My collaboration with Luxury Lifestyle Cosmetics has been absolutely amazing, and I am so grateful to be a sterling and represent our family brand to the world through my platform. She beamed at Dad, who nodded approvingly despite having complained privately for years about her frivolous career choice and complete lack of interest in the actual family business. When my turn came, I set down my fork deliberately and spoke with careful precision, knowing this would be my last opportunity to address them as the person they thought I was. I am thankful for all the lessons that life has taught me over the past decade, I said, looking directly at each family member in turn. That sometimes rejection leads you to exactly the right path. That persistence and determination matter more than privilege or connections. And that success is often the greatest teacher of all. I raised my glass with a slight smile. Here is to finding your own way in the world, no matter what obstacles you encounter. Dad frowned slightly, perhaps detecting something different in my tone, but he quickly moved on to his own gratitude speech, which predictably centered on the business legacy he had built and the bright future he envisioned for Sterling Tech Solutions. Under continued family leadership, Mom offered generic thanks for family togetherness and good health. Her words slightly slurred as the wine continued to take effect throughout the evening. Throughout the meal, Dad seemed increasingly distracted, checking his phone under the table every few minutes and occasionally whispering urgently to Mom, whose smile grew more strained with each passing course. Blake dominated most conversations with elaborate stories about clients he claimed to have impressed and deals he supposedly had in the pipeline, while Paige interrupted regularly to share comments from her followers who were watching her Thanksgiving Instagram story in real time. As Maria and the kitchen staff brought in the traditional dessert course of pumpkin and pecan pies, along with fresh whipped cream and coffee service, Dad suddenly tapped his knife against his crystal water glass. The sharp ping cut through all conversation like a blade. I have a very important announcement to make, he declared, standing at the head of the table with the natural authority of someone who had commanded boardrooms for decades. One that will affect everyone sitting at this table. The dining room fell completely silent. Even Paige lowered her phone, sensing that whatever was coming would be significant enough to capture her followers' attention. As you all know, I have dedicated my entire adult life to building Sterling Tech Solutions into an industry leader, Dad began, his voice carrying the weight of 3 decades of business success. But all good things must evolve, and the time has come for a major change in our family's business structure. He paused dramatically, clearly savoring the moment and the undivided attention of his family. After months of careful consideration and extensive negotiations, I have made the decision to sell Sterling Tech Solutions to a qualified buyer. The reaction was immediate and explosive. Blake choked on his wine, spraying expensive Cabernet across the white linen tablecloth. Paige gasped so dramatically that her phone nearly slipped from her hands. Amber looked confused, clearly unsure whether this was good news or bad news for her relationship with Blake. What? Blake sputtered, standing so abruptly that his chair scraped loudly against the hardwood floor. Dad, you cannot be serious about this. What about everything we have built together? Dad raised his hand imperiously, demanding silence from his shocked family. The decision has already been made, Blake. The contracts have been signed, and the deal will be finalized tomorrow afternoon. This buyer has made an extremely generous offer that represents the best possible outcome for our family's financial future. Paige found her voice, her perfectly applied makeup unable to hide the genuine panic in her expression. But Daddy, what about the Sterling legacy? My entire brand is built around being a Sterling Tech heiress. My followers expect me to inherit this company someday. Which brings me to the second part of my announcement, Dad continued, his expression unreadable as he prepared to deliver what he clearly considered the most important news. The proceeds from this sale will not be distributed to you children as an early inheritance. Now both Blake and Paige erupted simultaneously, their voices overlapping in a cacophony of protest and disbelief. That is our birthright. Blake slammed his fist on the table, rattling the fine china and causing the candle flames to flicker dangerously. You have been promising us this company our entire lives. Where is all that money going then? Paige wailed, now live streaming the family drama to her followers without any pretense of privacy or discretion. Dad waited patiently for their outbursts to subside before continuing with his prepared speech. Your mother and I will be using a portion of the proceeds for our retirement and travel plans. The remainder will be used to establish the Sterling Foundation, a charitable organization dedicated to supporting technology education for underprivileged students. Blake stood again, his face flushed red with anger and disbelief. I have given 15 years of my life to this company. You promised it would be mine someday. You made commitments to all of us about our future. Paige joined the chorus of complaints, tears streaming down her perfectly contoured cheeks while she continued recording everything for her social media audience. Throughout this entire explosive family drama, I remained perfectly still and calm, taking small, deliberate bites of my pecan pie as if nothing unusual was happening around me. Mom noticed my composure first, giving me a puzzled look across the table. "Claire," she said quietly, her voice cutting through the chaos. "You seem remarkably calm about all this news. Are you not surprised by your father's announcement?" The table gradually quieted as everyone turned toward me, suddenly remembering my presence in their shock and anger. I set down my dessert fork with careful precision, took a sip of water to clear my throat, and looked directly at my father with the confidence I had spent 10 years building. "Actually," I said, my voice steady and clear in the sudden silence, "I have just one question about this whole situation." I paused, letting the moment build before delivering the words that would change everything. "Dad, who exactly is the buyer?" Dad's chest puffed with unmistakable pride, clearly pleased to possess important information that none of his children knew. His eyes sparkled with the satisfaction of someone who held all the cards in a high-stakes negotiation. "The buyer is a very successful and highly respected technology investment firm called Phoenix Enterprises," he announced with obvious satisfaction. "They are paying $55 million, which is frankly more generous than I expected given our recent market challenges and the current economic climate." He leaned back in his chair, savoring what he believed was his moment of triumph. Phoenix Enterprises has an absolutely stellar reputation in the industry. They specialize in acquiring established companies and modernizing them with cutting-edge technology. Their CEO is someone named C. Stone, apparently a brilliant but very private individual who rarely makes public appearances. Blake wiped wine from his chin, still processing the shock of losing his expected inheritance. $55 million? That seems low for everything we have built over the decades. It is actually quite fair given our declining market position. Dad replied with brutal honesty that made Blake flinch visibly. Phoenix Enterprises was the only serious buyer willing to maintain the sterling name and retain most of our current workforce. Other potential buyers wanted to strip our assets and dissolve the company entirely. Paige had stopped crying long enough to resume filming, apparently realizing that this family drama was generating unprecedented engagement from her followers. "So some mysterious tech mogul is buying our family legacy," she said to her camera, with theatrical sadness. "This is literally the most dramatic Thanksgiving ever, you guys. My whole identity is about to change completely." I took another careful sip of water, using the moment to steady myself for what came next. The room felt charged with electricity, suspended between past and future, between everything they thought they knew and the truth that would shatter their understanding completely. "Dad," I said finally, my voice calm and perfectly controlled. "Despite my racing heart, I need to tell you something important about Phoenix Enterprises." The entire table turned toward me with expressions ranging from mild curiosity to complete confusion. Even Amber seemed to sense that something significant was about to happen. "What could you possibly know about a major technology investment firm?" Blake asked dismissively, his tone dripping with the same condescension I had endured my entire childhood. "You live in California doing freelance computer work." I smiled at him with genuine amusement before turning my attention back to Dad, who was watching me with growing puzzlement. "The thing is, Dad," I continued, letting each word land with deliberate precision, "I know Phoenix Enterprises extremely well." I paused, allowing the tension to build while I gathered the courage for the words that would change everything forever. "Because I am Phoenix Enterprises." The silence that followed was so complete and profound that I could hear the antique grandfather clock ticking in the hallway, marking the seconds of frozen disbelief. For what felt like an eternity, nobody moved, nobody spoke, nobody even seemed to breathe. I watched the emotions play across my father's face in rapid succession: confusion, disbelief, shock, and finally the first flickers of anger and realization dawning in his eyes. Blake was the first to break the paralysis, knocking over his wine glass as he lurched to his feet. The red liquid spread across the pristine white tablecloth like blood, creating a vivid punctuation mark for this moment of revelation. "What the hell are you talking about?" he demanded, his voice cracking with panic as he looked desperately between Dad and me. "That is completely impossible." Paige, incredibly, was still live streaming, her hands shaking as she captured what was rapidly becoming the most dramatic content her followers had ever witnessed. "Oh my God," she whispered to her phone camera, her professional composure finally cracking. "Did my sister just say she owns the company that is buying our family business? This cannot be real life right now." Mom reached for her wine glass with trembling fingers, found it empty, and immediately grabbed the bottle instead, pouring herself a generous refill while staring at me as if I had suddenly transformed into a completely different person. I stood slowly, feeling a strange sense of calm washing over me after carrying this secret for so many years. The weight of deception was finally lifting from my shoulders. "C. Stone," I explained, my voice steady despite the chaos erupting around me. "Claire Stone. That is the professional name I have been using for the past 10 years while building Phoenix Enterprises into a $180 million company." Dad found his voice at last, though it came out as barely more than a strangled whisper. "This is absolutely preposterous," he sputtered, his face cycling through various shades of red and white. "Phoenix Enterprises is run by C. Stone, a highly respected technology investor and entrepreneur, not by my daughter who has been struggling with small freelance projects in California." I reached into my designer purse and removed my business card case, made of sleek brushed platinum with the Phoenix Enterprises logo elegantly engraved on its surface. I slid a card across the polished table toward him with deliberate ceremony. "Actually, Dad, I am C. Stone. I founded Phoenix Enterprises 10 years ago, immediately after you dismissed my business proposal and humiliated me in front of your entire board of directors." Dad snatched up the business card, staring at it as if it might somehow transform into something more believable in his hands. "This has to be some kind of elaborate joke," he said, but his voice had lost all certainty and authority. "Some kind of forged documentation or identity theft." Phoenix Enterprises currently owns controlling interests in Nexus Technologies, DataStream Solutions, and TechCore Industries, I continued, naming Sterling Tech's 3 largest suppliers with practiced precision. "We also recently acquired majority stakes in your 2 biggest clients, McKinsey Manufacturing and Westfield Distribution. The Sterling Tech acquisition is simply the final piece in a comprehensive strategic plan I have been implementing for the past 2 years." Amber looked completely lost, clearly having no idea what any of this meant for her relationship or her future. Blake's face had gone from red to pale green as the implications began to sink in. "You have been spying on our business operations," Blake accused, his voice shaking with rage and fear. "That is corporate espionage. That is illegal." "No, Blake," I replied with patient precision. "It is called market research and competitive analysis. Everything I learned about Sterling Tech came from publicly available financial reports, industry publications, and completely legal business intelligence channels." I turned back to Dad, whose hands were trembling slightly as he continued to stare at my business card. "The truth is, Sterling Tech has been failing steadily for years. Your technology infrastructure is outdated, your management practices are inefficient, and you have lost 28% of your market share over the past 3 years while companies like mine have been thriving." "How dare you," Dad began, but I cut him off with a raised hand. "I tried to help you first, actually. 6 months ago, Phoenix Enterprises sent an anonymous partnership proposal through our legal team that would have allowed the Sterling name to remain on the company while providing the capital and technological upgrades you desperately needed to stay competitive." Dad's eyes widened with sudden recognition and understanding. "The Meridian proposal," he whispered. "That strategic partnership offer was from you?" I nodded confirmation. "I wanted to give you an opportunity to accept help in modernization without knowing it came from me, because I knew your pride would never allow you to accept assistance from the daughter you had written off as a failure. So this whole time," Blake shouted, his voice cracking with emotion, "you have been plotting against your own family. Planning to steal our company out from under us." "Not steal, Blake," I corrected him with calm firmness. "Purchase legally. For $55 million, which is honestly more than Sterling Tech's current market value given your declining performance and outdated systems." I kept my voice level despite the emotional storm brewing inside me. "And let us be absolutely clear about something. This company stopped being our family business the day Dad made it evident that only one child would ever have any meaningful role in it, despite that child's complete lack of qualifications, technical knowledge, or genuine interest in the industry." The room fell silent again as the brutal honesty of my words settled over everyone like a heavy blanket. Paige finally lowered her phone, the reality of the situation apparently overwhelming even her social media instincts. "So you are going to be our boss now?" she asked in a small, uncertain voice that sounded nothing like her usual confident influencer persona. Technically, yes, I confirmed. Though the current management structure will be completely reorganized to reflect actual merit and performance rather than family connections and nepotism. Dad stood abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the hardwood floor, his face a mask of anger and betrayal. "This deal is off," he declared with as much authority as he could muster. "I will not sell my life's work to my own daughter as some kind of elaborate revenge scheme." I shook my head slowly, feeling surprisingly calm in the face of his fury. "The contracts are already signed, Dad. The board approved the sale unanimously yesterday afternoon. The press release announcing the acquisition goes out tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. Eastern Time." I met his gaze steadily. Legally, Phoenix Enterprises already owns Sterling Tech Solutions. Dad's face went through a spectrum of emotions I had never seen before: disbelief, rage, humiliation, and something that might have been fear. His hands clenched into fists at his sides as he processed the reality that his dismissed daughter had completely outmaneuvered him. "I will fight this," he threatened, though the uncertainty in his eyes told me he already suspected I had covered every legal angle. "My attorneys will find a way to void this contract. There has to be some kind of conflict of interest or fraud involved." "Your attorneys have already vetted the deal extensively over the past 3 months," I interrupted gently, but firmly. "They advised you it was the best offer you would receive in the current market conditions. What exactly will you tell them now? That you are upset because the brilliant CEO you have been negotiating with turns out to be your own daughter?" Mom spoke for the first time since my revelation, her words slightly slurred but her gaze surprisingly clear and focused. "All these years, Claire," she said slowly, as if testing each word. "All these years while we thought you were struggling and barely getting by in California, you were actually building this massive company worth hundreds of millions of dollars?" "Yes, exactly," I confirmed, meeting her stare directly. "While you all assumed I was failing and would eventually come crawling back home defeated, I was creating something that would eventually dwarf everything this family had ever accomplished." Blake slammed his hand on the table again, causing the remaining wine glasses to rattle dangerously. "You have completely betrayed your own family," he shouted, his face flushed with alcohol and rage. "This is the most vindictive, calculated thing I have ever heard of in my entire life." "Really, Blake?" I asked with raised eyebrows. "More vindictive than systematically excluding me from every business decision for 15 years? More calculated than promoting you to vice president despite your complete lack of qualifications or interest in technology?" I stood up slowly, feeling the power dynamic in the room shift completely as I took control of the conversation. "More betraying than dismissing every idea I ever presented, humiliating me in front of the board, and then spending a decade telling people I was a failure while I was actually building something incredible." Paige had started crying again, but this time the tears seemed genuine rather than performative. "What happens to us now?" she asked in a small voice. "What happens to our trust funds, our positions in the company, our whole lives?" "That depends entirely on whether you want to actually work and contribute to the company's success, or just continue claiming its benefits without adding any real value," I answered honestly. Blake pointed an accusing finger directly at me, his hand shaking with fury. "You planned this for Thanksgiving deliberately, did not you? You wanted to humiliate us in front of the whole family, just like Dad supposedly humiliated you years ago." "I planned it for Thanksgiving because I knew everyone would be here together," I corrected him. "And because exactly 10 years ago at Thanksgiving dinner, Dad announced he was promoting you to vice president despite your complete lack of qualifications, while simultaneously telling me that my MIT degree and years of coding experience were not enough to warrant even an entry-level management position." Dad's face flushed darker as the painful memory resurfaced. "That was completely different," he protested. "Blake is my son, my firstborn. He deserved that opportunity to prove himself in the family business. And there it is," I said softly, feeling a familiar ache in my chest despite all my success. "The real reason I was never given a genuine chance. Not my ideas, not my education, not my work ethic or technical skills. Just my gender." The brutal truth of my words silenced the room completely. Even Blake had the grace to look uncomfortable with the naked honesty of what had just been acknowledged. "This conversation is over," Dad finally declared, his voice shaking with emotion he was struggling to control. "Everyone out of this dining room immediately. I need to call my attorneys and figure out how to stop this disaster." He stormed from the room, and moments later we heard the sound of his study doors slamming shut with enough force to rattle the windows. Mom rose unsteadily to her feet, swaying slightly from the wine and emotional shock. "I should probably go check on him," she murmured, though she paused beside my chair with an unreadable expression on her face. "Claire, are you really worth $180 million? I nodded confirmation. The company valuation was actually higher at our last funding round, but yes. "And all those times you said you could not afford to come home for Christmas or other holidays? I was running a rapidly growing company, Mom. And I needed all of you to keep underestimating me until I was ready for this moment." She touched my shoulder briefly, a gesture I could not quite interpret, then followed after Dad with careful, measured steps. As the dining room emptied around me, I remained seated among the ruins of our Thanksgiving feast. The turkey had grown cold, the candles had burned low, and the family I had once desperately wanted to impress had scattered in shock, anger, and confusion. It should have felt like complete victory, the ultimate vindication of everything I had worked toward for 10 years. Instead, a hollow ache spread through my chest as I realized that while I had finally earned their attention and respect, I felt further than ever from earning their genuine understanding or love. The cost of proving them wrong had been higher than I anticipated, and the satisfaction was more complicated than I had imagined it would be. Blake appeared in the doorway, having apparently sent Amber upstairs while he processed this family crisis. "We need to talk," he said grimly, his earlier anger replaced by something that looked almost like fear. "Privately." I followed him to the library, a smaller, more intimate room lined with leather-bound books that none of us had probably read in decades. He closed the door firmly behind us and turned to face me with an expression I had never seen before. "How much do you know?" he asked quietly, all his usual arrogance completely gone. "About what specifically, Blake?" "About the financial irregularities. About the accounts that do not quite add up correctly." I studied his face carefully, seeing genuine panic beneath his attempted composure. "You mean the $300,000 you have been embezzling through fake vendor accounts over the past 4 years? I asked matter-of-factly, the color drained completely from his face, confirming what my forensic accountants had discovered during their detailed audit of Sterling Tech's financial records. "How did you find out about that?" he whispered. "I have been conducting thorough due diligence on Sterling Tech for the past 18 months as part of the acquisition process. That includes complete financial audits, transaction analysis, and account verification. I know about the phantom consulting fees that went directly to your personal offshore accounts. I have the documentation, Blake." He sank into one of the leather chairs, suddenly looking much older than his 36 years. "What are you going to do with that information?" "That depends entirely on how you handle the transition period and whether you choose to cooperate with the new management structure or continue to be an obstacle." "You would actually send your own brother to prison?" "I would hold accountable a thief who happens to share my DNA," I corrected him. "But I am hoping it does not come to that. Sterling Tech needs stability during this transition, not the scandal of criminal prosecutions." He looked up at me with something approaching desperate hope. "What do you want from me, Claire?" "I want you to resign your executive position gracefully, repay the money you stole, and either find a new career path or earn a legitimate role in the company through actual merit and hard work. And if I do that, you will not pursue legal action?" "As long as you comply completely and cause no additional problems during the transition, yes." He nodded slowly, apparently recognizing that he had no other viable options. "I never meant for any of this to happen," he said quietly. "The gambling debts just kept growing, and I thought I could pay it back before anyone noticed." "Gambling debts, Blake? Really?" "Sports betting, mostly. It started small, but you know how these things spiral out of control." I did not know, actually, because I had never had the luxury of risking money I could not afford to lose. But I nodded anyway, feeling an unexpected pang of sympathy for my brother despite everything he had put me through. "The company will survive this transition, Blake. It might even thrive under proper leadership and modern management. But the days of coasting on family connections are over for everyone." He stood up slowly, extending his hand toward me with a gesture that felt surprisingly formal. "I guess congratulations are in order then, Claire. You really did prove us all wrong, did not you?" I shook his hand, noting how much older and more defeated he looked than he had just a few hours earlier. "I proved myself right, Blake. There is a difference." After Blake left the library, I found myself alone with the weight of everything that had just transpired. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 11 times, marking the end of what had been the most dramatic Thanksgiving in Sterling family history. I walked through the quiet house, my footsteps echoing on the marble floors as I processed the events of the evening. I retreated to my childhood bedroom, needing space to think and plan for what would come next. The house had descended into an eerie quiet, though I could hear muffled voices from behind Dad's study door where he was presumably on emergency calls with his legal team, trying to find some way to undo what had already been legally finalized. My old room felt like a time capsule, frozen exactly as I had left it when I departed for California 10 years ago. The twin bed with its navy blue comforter, the desk where I had spent countless hours coding and dreaming, the bookshelves lined with computer science textbooks and the few novels I had allowed myself as rare escapes from my studies. I pulled out one of my old journals at random, flipping through pages filled with detailed business plans, algorithm sketches, and notes for the very cloud integration platform that had eventually become Phoenix's flagship product. The irony was not lost on me that everything I had built had begun right here in this room where I had felt most invisible and undervalued. A sharp knock interrupted my thoughts. I opened the door to find Paige, her makeup finally removed to reveal a face that looked younger and more vulnerable than her usual polished social media persona. ***, can we talk?" she asked quietly, stepping into my room without waiting for permission. Like actually talk, not for content or followers, just sister to sister? I gestured toward the window seat where we used to sit together as children, before family business. And social media had complicated our relationship. So you are like a secret tech mogul, she said, settling onto the cushioned bench. That is actually incredible, Claire. I mean, terrifying for my brand, but objectively incredible. Thank you. I think. I have been thinking about what you said at dinner, about actually contributing value instead of just claiming benefits. She tucked her legs under her, looking more like the little sister I remembered than the influencer she had become. What would that even look like for someone like me? What do you mean, someone like you? Someone whose only marketable skill is looking pretty and making people want to buy things they probably do not need. I studied her face, seeing genuine uncertainty beneath her usual confidence. Paige, you have built a following of over 1 million people who trust your recommendations and engage with your content daily. You understand digital marketing, brand development, and audience psychology better than most people with business degrees. Those are legitimate skills in today's economy, but not exactly relevant to enterprise software integration, she pointed out with a rueful smile. Actually, more relevant than you might think. Phoenix has been expanding into consumer technology products, and we need someone who understands how to reach younger demographics and build authentic brand connections. Her eyes lit up with interest. Are you offering me an actual job? I am suggesting that if you are serious about contributing real value, we could find ways to utilize your skills that go beyond posting pretty pictures with products. What about my followers? My brand is built around being a sterling heiress living this glamorous lifestyle. Your brand could evolve into being a sterling woman who builds her own success while staying true to her family legacy. Your followers might actually respect that more than inherited wealth. She nodded thoughtfully. The engagement on tonight's content has been insane. People are fascinated by family business drama, especially when it involves secret millionaires and plot twists. Just promise me you will not turn this whole situation into a multi-part series for views. Too late, she admitted with a sheepish grin. But I can control the narrative to focus on female empowerment and family growth rather than just drama and conflict. Another knock interrupted us, and Mom entered looking significantly more sober than she had at dinner. She had changed from her formal dress into a cashmere sweater and slacks, her armor of proper Greenwich wife temporarily set aside. Your father has locked himself in his study with a bottle of scotch and every legal document related to the company, she said, settling into the chair at my old desk. He is convinced there must be some loophole or technicality that can stop the sale. There is not, I said simply. His lawyers were very thorough. They confirmed it was the best offer Sterling Tech was likely to receive. Mom nodded, looking around my preserved childhood room with eyes that seemed to be seeing it for the first time. You know, I kept everything exactly as you left it because I always thought you would come back once you got this rebellion out of your system. It was never a rebellion, Mom. It was a career. It was my life. $180 million, she mused, shaking her head in disbelief. My little girl built a company worth $180 million while we all thought you were struggling to pay rent. You could have asked, I said, feeling the old hurt rise in my throat. Any of you could have shown genuine interest in what I was actually doing with my life, but none of you ever really wanted to know the details. Tears welled in her eyes, and for the first time in years, I saw my mother as a person rather than just an enabler of Dad's behavior. I knew, Claire, she said quietly. Not the specifics, not the incredible scale of your success, but I knew. You were special. I saw it when you were little, the way your mind worked differently from the rest of us, how you understood things that we could not even begin to grasp. She wiped at her cheeks with the back of her hand. I just did not know how to help you in a family like ours, with a man like your father who saw the world in such rigid, traditional terms. You could have stood up for me, I said, the words coming out more raw than I intended. All those times he dismissed my ideas, humiliated me, made me feel worthless. You just sat there and let it happen. I was wrong, she admitted without hesitation. I told myself I was keeping the peace, being a supportive wife, maintaining family harmony. But I failed as your mother when you needed an advocate most. The simple acknowledgement hit me harder than any argument or justification could have. I had come prepared for anger, for accusations, even for legal threats. I had not prepared for genuine remorse and accountability. What happens now? Mom asked after we sat in silence for several minutes. Tomorrow morning when this becomes public knowledge? What happens to our family? Tomorrow morning, the acquisition becomes official. Sterling Tech will become a subsidiary of Phoenix Enterprises. The company name will remain for now, but operations will be completely restructured with new management and updated technology systems. I hesitated before adding, Dad and Blake will be offered advisory positions with no actual authority, mostly for appearance sake during the transition period. And you? Will you move back to Connecticut to run the company? I shook my head. I will remain based in San Francisco. We will install a new management team here in Greenwich, people who actually understand modern technology and efficient business practices. Mom nodded, seeming to understand everything I was not saying directly. That I had outgrown this house, this family dynamic, this version of myself that had been defined by their limitations rather than my own potential. Your father may never forgive you for this, she warned softly. I know, I acknowledged. But this was never about forgiveness, Mom. It was about finally being seen and respected for who I actually am, not who you all assumed I was. Paige had been unusually quiet during our conversation, but now she spoke up thoughtfully. Maybe forgiveness is not the right goal anyway. Maybe the goal should be understanding, like actually seeing each other clearly for the first time. Mom and I both looked at her with surprise, not expecting such insight from someone we had always seen as focused mainly on surface-level concerns. When did you become so wise? I asked with genuine curiosity. When I realized that my whole identity was built on being part of something that just got sold to my sister who I never really knew was brilliant, she replied with a self-deprecating laugh. After they left, I worked until dawn on my laptop, preparing for the media attention and business logistics that would follow the morning's announcement. As the first gray light of November morning filtered through my curtains, I changed into one of my Armani suits, styled my hair into the sleek professional look that C. Stone was known for in her rare public appearances, and prepared to face whatever came next. The morning would bring either a new beginning for the Sterling family or its final fracturing into irreparable pieces. Either way, I was ready to meet it head-on, with the confidence that came from 10 years of proving that success is possible when you refuse to accept other people's limitations as your own ***. But first, there would be one final confrontation. With the man whose approval I had once craved more than anything else in the world. The kitchen was eerily quiet when I came downstairs at 7 a.m., dressed in my tailored business suit and ready to face whatever this day would bring. Maria silently handed me a cup of perfectly brewed coffee, her weathered hand steady despite the emotional earthquake that had shaken our household the night before. Her eyes communicated a mixture of concern and what looked remarkably like pride. Miss Clare, she said softly, I always knew you would do something extraordinary. Even when you were little, there was something different about you, something special. Thank you, Maria. That means more to me than you know. The formal dining room had been completely cleared of last night's Thanksgiving disaster, with no evidence remaining of the family explosion except the lingering tension that seemed to permeate every corner of the house. I checked my phone to find 3 missed calls from my executive team in San Francisco, eager for updates on the acquisition announcement scheduled for 9 a.m. Eastern Time. There was also a text from Rachel that simply read, Did you survive the family nuclear explosion? Are they still breathing? Call me when you can. I had just finished responding to my team's messages when Dad appeared in the kitchen doorway. He looked like he had aged 10 years overnight, with deep lines around his eyes and a slight tremor in his hands that suggested he had not slept at all. His usually perfect posture was stooped, and his normally immaculate appearance was disheveled. ***, my study. Now, he said without any preamble, his voice hoarse from what had clearly been a long night of phone calls and scotch. I followed him down the familiar hallway to the room that had always represented the center of Sterling family power. The wood-paneled walls were covered with framed business awards, magazine covers featuring Dad's success stories, and photographs with politicians and celebrities. Conspicuously absent was any recognition of my achievements, though my MIT graduation photo sat half-hidden behind more prominent family pictures on a side table. Dad took his seat behind the massive mahogany desk, a position he had used to intimidate business rivals and subordinates for 30 years. I chose not to sit in the visitor's chair as expected, instead perching on the edge of the desk itself, a subtle but unmistakable repositioning of our power dynamic. My attorneys have confirmed what you said last night, he began without any pleasantries or small talk. The sale is legally binding. The board vote was unanimous. The contracts are ironclad. Of course they are, I replied calmly. Sterling Tech has been declining for 3 consecutive years. Your technology infrastructure is obsolete, your management structure is bloated and inefficient, and your development pipeline is completely empty. The board recognized an excellent offer when they saw it. $55 million, he said, shaking his head with something that might have been regret. The company was valued at $80 million just 3 years ago. The company was significantly overvalued 3 years ago, I corrected matter-of-factly. And I offered substantially more than any other potential buyer would have. Most acquisition firms would have stripped the valuable assets and dissolved the Sterling name entirely. He looked up sharply, a flicker of his old intensity returning to his tired eyes. And is that your plan? To erase the family legacy that 3 generations of sterling men built from nothing? Despite everything that has happened between us, I respect what Grandfather James built and what you expanded, I said, surprising myself with the sincerity in my voice. The sterling name will remain, though the company structure and operations will change dramatically. For the first time since this conversation began, uncertainty crossed his weathered features. What exactly are your plans for the company? What happens to the people who have worked there for decades? I had waited 10 years for him to ask my opinion on business matters. The irony was not lost on me that it was happening only after I had already taken control. Sterling Tech will become the Enterprise Solutions division of Phoenix Enterprises, focusing on updating and modernizing your legacy products while integrating them with our advanced cloud platforms. We will retain approximately 70% of the current workforce, with significant changes limited to upper management positions. And me, he asked, the question clearly costing him considerable pride. What happens to me in this new structure? You will be offered a position as Chairman Emeritus, I replied, using the formal title I had decided on during my sleepless night of planning. No operational authority or day-to-day responsibilities, but you will maintain an office here and can advise on client relationships during the transition period. His jaw tightened visibly. A figurehead position. A respected advisory role with full benefits and a generous compensation package, I countered. You will have the opportunity to help ensure a smooth transition while maintaining your dignity and professional reputation. He stood abruptly and walked to the window that overlooked the perfectly maintained gardens where he had taught Blake and me to throw a football when we were children. For a long moment he said nothing, his back to me as he stared out at the property that generations of sterling success had built and maintained. How did you do it? He finally asked, his voice quieter and more vulnerable than I had ever heard it. How did you build something that valuable when you started with nothing? No family connections, no startup capital, no established network of investors or clients. I had my education, I reminded him. The MIT degree that you said was impressive. In theory but useless in practice. And I had tremendous motivation to prove you completely wrong about my potential. He turned back to face me, his expression troubled and conflicted. I expected you to fail, he said with brutal honesty. 90% of startups never make it past the first 3 years. I thought I was protecting you from inevitable disappointment and public humiliation by ensuring I never got the chance to try. I raised an eyebrow. That is not protection, Dad. That is control based on your own fears and limitations. He flinched slightly at the accusation but did not deny it. Perhaps you are right, he admitted after a long pause. I built this company from what my father started, expanded it dramatically over 3 decades. I thought my experience and judgment were infallible. But you were wrong, I said simply, without malice or satisfaction. You were wrong about me, wrong about the direction of the technology industry, and wrong about Blake being a natural successor to your legacy. At the mention of my brother, Dad's expression darkened with fresh concern. Speaking of Blake, I assume you know about his financial irregularities? I know about the embezzlement, yes. $300,000 over 4 years, primarily to cover gambling debts. Dad sank back into his leather chair, the shock of this revelation apparently overwhelming on top of everything else. That cannot be true. He makes an excellent salary, has access to his trust fund. Why would he need to steal from the company? Sports betting addiction, based on my investigation. The debt spiraled out of control faster than his legitimate income could cover. So both my son and my company were failing, and I was too blind to see either situation clearly, he said, burying his face in his hands briefly before looking back up at me with eyes that seemed to hold the weight of 30 years of mistakes. Not blind, I said, softening my tone slightly. Just looking in the wrong direction, focusing on maintaining control rather than fostering genuine growth and innovation. A long silence stretched between us, filled with decades of misunderstanding, missed opportunities, and the complicated love that exists between family members even when they fail each other repeatedly. When he finally spoke again, his voice had changed completely. The arrogance and dismissiveness were gone, replaced with something approaching genuine curiosity and respect. Tell me how you did it, he said. Really? No connections who knew the sterling name, no investors who owed me favors, no family money to fall back on when things got difficult. How did you build something so successful from absolutely nothing? I considered deflecting or giving him a superficial answer, but there was something in his question that seemed genuinely sincere. For the first time in our relationship, he was asking about my work, not to dismiss it, but to understand it. I started very small, I explained, leaning back against his desk. Freelance development work to build initial capital, living in a tiny studio apartment and eating ramen noodles for 3 years to keep overhead minimal. Then I created a proprietary integration platform that solved a problem every enterprise. Company faces, connecting legacy systems with modern cloud architecture. A flicker of recognition crossed his tired features. The middleware solution you proposed when you were 22. I nodded, surprised he remembered even that much detail. Yes, but refined and made more adaptable through real-world application. I used it to attract our first major clients, reinvested every profit back into research and development, and built a team of brilliant engineers who believed in the vision. Without the sterling name to open doors, he mused thoughtfully. Because I did not have that advantage, I corrected him. Being underestimated became a powerful strategic position. No one saw Phoenix Enterprises as a threat until we were already dominating market segments that established companies had ignored. He almost smiled at that observation. Clearly, I underestimated you completely. Another comfortable silence fell. Different from the hostile tension that had characterized our relationship for so many years. I checked my watch. The press release goes public in 30 minutes. We should discuss the immediate next steps and how to handle the media attention. What about Blake and Paige? He asked. What happens to them in this new structure? Blake will be offered a choice: resign quietly with a reasonable severance package, or face potential legal consequences for the embezzlement. As for Paige, I paused, considering her unexpected insight from the previous evening. She actually made a compelling case last night for serving as a brand ambassador for our consumer products division. Her social media expertise could be genuinely valuable in the right context. Dad looked surprised by this pragmatic approach. You would keep them involved after everything that has happened? This was never about destroying the family, Dad. It was about claiming my rightful place in it, on my own terms, with the respect and recognition I earned through my own achievements. He nodded slowly, studying my face as if seeing me clearly for the first time in decades. You outmaneuvered me completely, he said, and I was startled to detect what sounded almost like pride in his voice. Your grandfather James would have been impressed by this strategy. Coming from him, it was as close to approval and validation as I had ever received. I felt a complicated mix of emotions rising in my chest, not quite vindication, not quite forgiveness, but something hovering in the space between hurt and healing. I learned by watching you, I acknowledged. Even when you did not think I was paying attention to your business decisions and strategic thinking. He extended his hand across the desk in a gesture that felt formal and significant. So, Chairman Emeritus reporting to CEO Claire, he said with what might have been the beginning of genuine respect. Welcome to Sterling Phoenix Technologies. I took his hand, feeling the calluses from decades of hard work and the slight tremor of a man confronting the end of one era and the beginning of another. Welcome to the future, Dad. 6 months after that explosive Thanksgiving, I stood in the newly renovated headquarters of Sterling Phoenix Technologies. The former Sterling Tech building had been completely transformed with open workspaces, cutting-edge technology infrastructure, and a collaborative environment that honored the company's history while embracing its innovative future. My role as CEO meant splitting time between San Francisco and Greenwich, overseeing the integration of both companies and managing our expanded product portfolio. The transition had been challenging but exceeded even my most optimistic projections. Dad had surprised everyone by embracing his chairman emeritus role with unexpected grace. Once the initial shock subsided, he found genuine satisfaction in mentoring younger employees and maintaining relationships with longtime clients. Our weekly meetings had become something I actually anticipated, building a professional relationship based on mutual respect rather than disappointment. Blake's situation proved more complicated. After confronting the embezzlement evidence, he initially threatened legal action before accepting reality. He chose to repay the stolen funds, resign from his executive position, and enroll in a legitimate MBA program. To my surprise, he was now halfway through his first semester, occasionally calling with genuine business strategy questions. Paige had absolutely flourished as brand ambassador for our consumer division. Her followers were captivated by the family business transformation story, which she carefully presented as female empowerment rather than family destruction. Her tech heiress rebrand opened doors to younger demographics we had previously struggled to reach. Mom had perhaps changed most dramatically. Freed from her peacekeeper role, she reduced her drinking, started volunteering with women's education initiatives, and joined the board of a female founder incubator. I want to help other daughters avoid the mistakes I made, she told me. As I walked through the office, employees nodded respectfully. I was no longer the mysterious sea stone or the dismissed middle child, but simply Claire, the CEO who had modernized a failing family business while creating opportunities for everyone involved. My assistant interrupted my thoughts. Your father is waiting in the conference room with quarterly reports, and your mother called about tonight's investor dinner. I headed toward the meeting, pausing at the newly installed company timeline in the lobby. It displayed sterling tech's evolution from grandfather James's garage startup to our current Sterling Phoenix Technologies iteration. My photograph now hung alongside those of my grandfather and father, 3 generations of leadership with my achievements listed prominently. Thanksgiving was approaching again, and this year would be entirely different. We had planned a smaller, intimate family dinner without the performative traditions that had dominated previous gatherings. No formal gratitude speeches, no business posturing, just a family still learning to genuinely see each other. The journey from rejection to leadership had been longer and more painful than imaginable when I left Connecticut 10 years ago. Merging family and business continued requiring daily patience and perspective. I was still developing, yet slowly, conversation by conversation, the Sterling family was creating healthier dynamics. Mom hosted a dinner last month where everyone spoke equally and listened without anyone storming out. Small victories, but meaningful ones. The most profound moment came unexpectedly during a late office night when Dad and I reviewed first quarter results. Numbers exceeded all projections with 98% client retention and 32% revenue growth. You have already accomplished more than I did in my first decade, he said quietly, staring at the spreadsheet. The simple acknowledgement healed something I had not realized was still broken, not because I needed his professional validation anymore, but because it represented the human recognition I had sought all along. As I entered the conference room, where Dad waited with quarterly reports, I reflected on the complex journey from that Thanksgiving revelation to today. The experience taught me that success alone cannot heal family wounds. Proving myself professionally had been satisfying but ultimately hollow until it led to genuine human connection. The lesson I carried forward was not that success is the best revenge, but that success without reconciliation leaves everyone poorer. True victory came not when I proved my father wrong, but when we both found ways to be right together. For anyone watching this who recognizes these painful family dynamics, who has felt invisible or undervalued by those who should see you most clearly, I hope my story offers both inspiration and important caution. Building your own success is powerful and necessary, but healing family relationships requires more than professional achievement. It demands vulnerability, honesty, and the courage to offer second chances even when they seem undeserved. The hardest part was not the acquisition itself, but the ongoing work of building relationships that could withstand both our shared history and current professional roles. Dad occasionally slipped into authoritarian patterns before catching himself. I sometimes found myself unnecessarily defensive, anticipating dismissal that no longer came. If you have experienced similar family business challenges, remember that there is a difference between winning and resolving, between being right and being whole. I had needed to learn that lesson the hard way. Perhaps the most important realization was that the girl who left Connecticut broken and dismissed had not been replaced by the successful woman who returned. She had been transformed, strengthened, and ultimately integrated into someone who could hold both the pain of rejection and the power of achievement without letting either define her completely. True success meant not just building something valuable, but using that success to create space for healing and growth. The Sterling family was still a work in progress, but we were finally working on it together. As Dad looked up from the quarterly reports with genuine pride in his eyes, I realized this was what victory actually looked like, not the moment you prove them wrong, but the moment you all choose to grow beyond who you used to be. The sweetest revenge, it turned out, was not revenge at all. It was transformation, reconciliation, and the quiet satisfaction of becoming exactly who you were meant to be while helping others do the same. For anyone struggling with family business dynamics or feeling underestimated by those who should believe in you most, remember that your worth is not determined by their recognition. But sometimes, when you build something undeniable, recognition follows naturally, and sometimes, just sometimes, that recognition becomes the foundation for something even more valuable than professional success: genuine understanding between people who share DNA but had forgotten how to see each other clearly. The true measure of success is not what you build alone, but what you create together. This Thanksgiving, we would finally have something real to be grateful for.